Hocus Potus is off of week 2 of Isolated. It's a very aggressive track. It's very angry. If there was any confusion about why that might be, I would direct you to the title. Now, that being said, it was an interesting, this was a fun thing because I got to express that kind of the emotion I was feeling towards that situation at the moment. And that's not something I usually get to create too often, so it was refreshing. So what I'm going to do this time around, because this is a pretty dynamic track as far as it's a builder. So I'm just going to kind of go start to finish as opposed to going top to bottom down, and we'll talk about the intro through the rather heavy metal ending. So starting in, we get these very low bassy bass synths. And that's going to be our foundation. For basically the whole piece is based around these bass pulses. And eventually what we start to like build out this little section. I want it to be brooding. I want it to be dark. So I have these pads come in. And I'm just going to go to a later section where you can hear them all. But these fade in throughout the bass. And they're pretty mechanical sounding, which sounds industrial. It sounds angry, and that was exactly what I wanted. I'll break them down. Like this guy, this is called out-of-box filler. So I can only assume I made this with the guitar pedals, probably the modular synth, something like that. But it's definitely, there's a lot of reverb. There's outboard processing on that, without a doubt. Then there's also this, which is this very like robotic, mechanical synthesizer sound. I made this with a synth I can't show you yet because it's in beta, but I will say it's very exciting, and almost all the synthesized sounds on this record were made with it. It is a nasty beast. So that is where that comes from, and one day hopefully I can tell you more about it, but just know that I have a secret synth that you don't have. That is awesome. Then lastly, we have this kind of layer in there. And it's called Charpad, but that's actually a granulized version of Charlotte from Hybrid's voice. So sorry, Charlotte, I reused you. You'll never know, too late. I later bring in these melodies, and these remind me very much of like a John Carpenter kind of melody, like Halloween or something like that. And I think that's kind of why I like them, because they do kind of, they evoke that. And they sound like this. We should probably talk about the timing too. This track is not in 4/4. It's technically, it's in, that little arpeggio is in 13/8, or that little motif, that's in 13/8. This track mostly is in 13/4. Really, it's a compound meter. It's a bar of 6 followed by a bar of 7. But for the sake of the sequencer, it was just easier to set the whole track to be 13/4. There are a few time changes later. These are more transitional. But the groove of this is all a compound meter of 6/4 followed by 7/4. So consequently, this little melody, this is in 13/8. And there are a few different parts of it. So the first is this guy, was just a very washed out reverb pad. And it's not anything special at all. I mean, if I bring it, I can literally see it is Serum with the Eventide Black Hole. And let's just make it active. I'm curious because I'm writing this stuff really quickly right now. So I'm just, if it works, it works. But here it is. I mean, that just sounds like a sawtooth wave. Simple as that. And lo and behold, it's just a raw sawtooth. There is nothing else. I could have used literally anything to do this. And I pulled this up because I just did. And then that gets washed out entirely. So that's that pad. So let's make that guy go away. He gets EQ'd, obviously. This is the EQ setting on him, so that pad before now becomes this. I just want it to kind of sit in the background. It's a harmonic backdrop, if you will. So then we get to the little melodies, and there are two layers of it. The first is this one. And if you listen to that, you can hear the subdivisions are basically 2 repetitions of 5/8 and then 1 quick of 3/8. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is the rhythm of this little melody. And then there's a top version of it too. And this is what makes me think of John Carpenter. It's this part of it. But then you layer those two things together, and we have that little melody right there. These things, they get bussed together into, it's called a Plux bus. Again, just a little bit of mix EQ that I'm just bringing out some of the mid-range just to really bring it out in the mix later. It's not something that makes a big difference on its own. There is some filter automation, so I have that Mic DSP filter bank, which is just a clean filter. So that, I use that for transitions. Like for instance, the way this thing comes in, it's getting, the filter's opening up. So that's the story there. And then I also have these strings, and these are like very quick tremolo kind of strings. And I think I did it with LA scoring strings. But basically, they sound like this. And they're 3 layers. So the first one's this guy. Underneath it we have him. And then hit her. So it's creating basically a big like tremolo cluster. And that was the purpose of it. I just want it to be the swell. So when you add that to, say, these other pads, it becomes pretty big, and it's just a very cool, like, cinematic orchestral kind of swell. So that was the whole principle of that. Other than that, the only thing that happens on the bass, really, and it's called gnarl bass, is that he opens up. And I believe that's actually printed directly into the file. Because if I take gnarl bass, it's just going to multi-band compressors. Yeah, so that's actually in the thing. But this is the actual sound. I mean, it's absolutely gnarly. Hence the name gnarl bass. It goes to a delay send, Echo Boy, and it's just a dotted quarter note. I am offsetting the left and right channels just slightly, just to give it a wider stereo image on the delay, but for all intents and purposes, it's a really, really basic delay. And then I later have these shaker hats that come in. Really, really minimal, but they just add some drive. They were also made on that synth. So that's what goes there. So then we build up until we get this drop. So that's where you can really feel the awkwardness of the time signature, and that's what's fun about it. It's unsettling on purpose. So the time signature isn't just for fun. The point of it is to make you feel off, and that's why it almost feels like there's a hiccup when you're waiting for that next kick drum to come in. So there are a few different kicks here, and they're all layered to make it sound really thick. The first one's this. Distortion pedals, fuzz pedals. Kick drum through a fuzz pedal. Simple as that. Underneath it, I have, it's called a Halpern kick. And this is what it was before the plugins. It comes from Matt Halpern's, I guess, the Periphery for Drum library with Get Good Drums. And I'm using it basically as just a top kick. It's really just adding some attack. So if you look at the EQs, it's just kind of sculpting this thing just to give it some space, give it that reverb, and give it a click, but also remove any low end. So that's with it with the plugins. Then I have this kick, and this, it's called the Berkeley Schweiman kick. I actually made this at Berkeley back in November when I was visiting. And it was a kick made out of a resonant filter on a Schweiman filter, or it's the resonant, you take a Schweiman filter, you put the resonance all the way up so it becomes a self-oscillating oscillator basically, or that's redundant, but the filter self-oscillates, it creates a sine wave. And then I just ran a maths, like an envelope generator into the pitch, or the frequency I should say, of the filter, and that's how we created that kick. And then underneath it, there's a very big sub drop. And I made that, this is a sample I made last year, and I tend to use it a lot because I just really like it. I made this on a Make Noise DPO on modular, but then it went through a Fractal Audio Axe FX, a guitar amp basically. And it just added this character to the thing where it just rumbles. It cut out all the mid-range, and it's just subby and it hurts. And it is a great way to accentuate a downbeat. So that is the principle of having the big boom drop, if you will. Then we have these kind of other off drums. First is this guy. Super distorted. And that likely, I mean, here's without plugins. Could have been a snare. Probably was a snare, but then it went through fuzz pedals. And as you can tell, I love running things out of the box. I love putting them through outboard gear and pedals because you get so much character, and it's fun, it's exciting. And that doesn't sound like a plugin to me. Like no plugin sounds like that. So we have that hit basically every couple of bars. And then there are also these hits, which come after the death snare, which sounds kind of funny and mechanical, and it's literally my washing machine. I got a box of meat delivered, and it came with dry ice to keep the meat cold. And so I took the dry ice into the garage where my washer and dryer are, and I wanted to record the dry ice because if you put dry ice on metal, it screams. So I was putting the dry ice on the washing machine just to see how that would work, and that actually worked out great. I used those samples in a different track, but I had these little moments of where like the metal of the washing machine got hit, and that became these things. Just fun metallic hits. And then there are also these filtery drums. And if we take off all the plugins, it's drums through fuzz. Again, it's pedals, simple as that. Then it's various EQ settings. Each one of these channels, it's a different EQ setting. So let's blow these up a bit. So on the top channel, this is the EQ setting. On the one below it, it's a little bit lower on the frequency range. The one below that is just slightly higher, but still lower than the first one. And then the bottom one is the lowest of them all. So it creates this it's almost like a stepped filter automation, but as opposed to doing the stepped filter, I did it on different channels so I could always drop different samples onto those individual channels and always have that kind of filter setting. And then I'm not worrying about automation or anything. It just makes life so much easier. And as you can see, there's a quick little edit going on right here. It's not even quantized. Like, it's just, I just decided this sounded good and I duplicated it a few times. Simple as that. And I like it. So those are our kind of filtery percussion. And what else is going on now in this drop section? The synths are way heavier. So Dan synth, which is our secret synth, which can be definitely called Dan synth. Sounds like this. The two layers. There's the top layer. And that was what we were using in the intro. The bottom layer is this. Really robotic sounding. They are bussed together, and on that bus, there's some EQ, nothing crazy. Multiband compression, just really, because there's a lot of low end, so it's just taming it a little bit. You know, when it, let's add the other one back in. Now you can see the multiband compressor reacts a little bit more aggressively once we have both synths hitting it. But it's just cleaning up the low end a bit. I mean, I want this thing to be in your face. I want it to be aggressive. That's the purpose of this. So that's the Dan synth. And then there's also like a siren kind of sound. And that just happens basically before a quarter note before a drop. I think it's a quarter note. No, it is not. It is 3/4 notes. That makes sense. So yeah, after like 2 bars of 5, then I hit that. So then I have the 3 beats, which makes our 5 plus 5 is 10, plus 3 equals 13. So that's what we have that hitting on 3 beats before, basically on the 11th beat. Then eventually we start to bring in these pads that I introduced earlier. So these come back in. And again, that's really to build transition. The tremolo strings come back in as well. And that's kind of it for that first section. So then we kind of chill out. I mean, this is a little bit of a breakdown. And I've got these really aggressive, more robotic sounding things. Also made with that synth. There is a filter on it. Let's take the reverb off. I mean, it almost sounds like a drill, but like a really synthetically robotic drill. And that, you know, we use that basically as just, it's a sound effect that I want to hit, and I want to always have that squeal because it sounds creepy. Our little melodies are, let's say the John Carpenter melodies. These come back. And where are you? Here you are. So you know what? I'm just going to loop this part, and I will slowly reintroduce the elements that are getting added. So here are John Carpenter melodies. And they fade in. And there's also that same, kind of like that hooky bass we have. That's in there now too. As do these siren-y squeal things. And then those shakers that I created earlier. Again, all pushing momentum. There is one sound effect here, just a sub hit. It's kind of bad sounding, to be honest, and that's kind of what's fun about it. And we finally add some new pads. This is the only time I think we see these in the entire piece. and they're just really detuned pads. They both have pitch automation going on. It's not the same, so I want them to get kind of pulled further and further apart. So here's the first one. All right, so that stays flat. Then we add the second one, which slowly adds a pitch increase. So when you put them together, you get all the notes rubbing, and it just sounds tense. It's cool. And then there's some quick effects, just general reverse things. Nothing crazy. So then it comes back in, and now the beat is much more aggressive. Everything is more full on now. So let's just take this from this little, there's a little bit of a pause. This is where we get a little break from the time signature change. It's just to really give me some space to hit you harder when the drop comes back in. So far, this is all stuff that we had in the section before. It's got a little bit more activity going on. We have now this hat, it's called Rezo hat. That's made actually with this guy, running a hi-hat into an Eventide H9. And I mean, I use this as a send, basically. I don't use it really as a guitar pedal. I use it for basically a send effect out of Pro Tools, so it lives over there. And I send things into it all the time when I want to basically use the Eventide DSP for reverbs, filters, flangers, delay. I mean, it's just, they make the best stuff. They really do. So for that kind of thing. And so consequently, I use this all the time for processing drums and processing whatever. And so Rezo hats, these were probably like a phaser or a flanger, something like that, something really resonant. Let's take off the plugins, and this is the raw sound. So yeah, you can hear it. It seems like there's a phaser. But then there's a little bit of EQ stuff going on, a delay, a reverb, nothing crazy. But it just, basically every time that downbeat hits, we now get this sound too, and it just drives it that much further. And adds ambience, it adds some space. We have these shakers now going on the entire time. And they have all the high end in them now finally, which we didn't really have before. Then this is where new drums get introduced. This is where the song gets really heavy. First is death snare. I don't know exactly how I did that. I think if I can drag it out and I can see what the original sample is, or what I recorded it as, so it sounds like this. So it's definitely started as a snare drum. It went through guitar pedals, and it went through like a really mid-rangey one. So it could have gone through, I have a pedal by Lone Wolf Audio called the Left Hand Wrath, which is like a boutique clone of the old Boss HM2, like Swedish death metal pedal. It kind of sounds like that's probably what was going on. It's so distorted, it actually has a tone now, which is really cool, and it sounds great. So it serves this function of basically every time I want to hit that beat in the middle of the bar, And remember, this is an odd time. It accentuates that really hard. And then we had these other hits earlier. So where did he go? There are a lot of weird drums in here. So let's go back here. There, this guy, the other pedal drum. So they're all functioning kind of as snares, but yeah, it's not exactly a tight groove. So that's the fun of those. And this is all basically building now to the climax. All the other synths, these are all the same. We have these again. And the rhythm, what I do like about this rhythm also of the dance synth is it tells you you're off too, because it hits every downbeat, every quarter note. But then it hiccups on the last one. So basically on the 7th one, you'd expect it to, if we were in, say, 7, it would just not hiccup. It would keep going. And I love that little hiccup because that's what makes you go, huh, that's weird. So again, we have that odd time going. The sirens come back. And as they evolve, then I pitch them down just so they sound a little bit creepier. And now we introduce the guitars finally. And I mean, this is like my favorite moment of the whole thing. This is one of the most metal things I've probably ever done. These start to fade in over this whole section. So with everything else. It's really metal. So let's talk about this for a minute. I do add one thing to the drums, and that is my heavy metal kick drum, my double bass. Right? And that likely came from Get Good Drums, I believe. It probably did. And we also have crashes finally, which you can see came from Slate. So the groove of this thing now, in general, is a little bit tighter, just because the kick actually really helps, or the double bass really helps feel less off because there's less space now. Like that to me actually grooves pretty well. At least I feel it, but I mean, I made it, so I would. Let's talk about the guitars, because these are fun. So here they are, totally soloed in their ugly glory. So there are 3 layers. This is the first one. And this, these were all done for the most part with the Axe effects. It's likely a diesel VH4 model. That's typically what I tend to use. I can't totally be sure. But so we have this one, and just to try something different, as opposed to using a cab from that, I used this around. This is the new Get Good Drums Zilla cabs, and they sound great. So here it is without the cabs, like really raw, with the cab. And for the second channel, it's actually an exact duplicate. But it doesn't have the fills. It doesn't have in it. The reason why it's an exact duplicate is as opposed to doing volume automation, I wanted basically the palm muted chugs to be the loudest. And as opposed to doing automation, I just duped the channel and then I mixed it in lightly underneath it, so that way every time we basically have this moment, the chugs are heavier and I don't have to think about automation. So that's why there's a duplicate channel. Same thing, I mean, there's also the same EQ on it. But then what's fun about this also is then the third one, it's the same thing once again without the cab. So it's all like really scratchy and noisy, but mixed in with everything, it sounds great. It's almost subtle, but I miss it if I take it away. Like it's scratchy and it's dirty and it reminds me of like 9 Inch Nails. So I love it. The other cool thing I love about this little section is this whole thing is really, really minor in general. This guitar riff is where it changes slightly because this, let's actually change this for a second. There's a major third in there. And basically what it's doing, it's Spanish Phrygian, which is a motive harmonic minor, but I mean, this is easier. So, whereas the rest of, what's this connected to? Let's just pull this up here. I'm just gonna run it through. Yeah, why not? Great. So, this track, for the most part, mostly in D minor, right? But what's fun about this, those are flat 2, goes to the octave, but then an F sharp. Which is such a cool tone to me. It recontextualizes, it makes it seem heavier. And I've always loved Spanish Phrygian because it's such a cool sound where, you know, normal minor, whatever. Even Phrygian, I mean, I love Phrygian because you get the flat 2. But regular Phrygian, still, it's fine. Whatever, I fucked it up. But Spanish Phrygian, you get the major third. So it's so cool. So that's what makes this a lot more interesting to me, is that the heaviness of like the very staccato riffing with the, I love that. That's stuff I get off on. So that's what's going on there, and then there's a variation of it later, where the second time around it does this, and this is a fun one too because again it's still based on Phrygian or Spanish Phrygian, but as opposed to going down to the major third from the second time around, we hit this. So basically, we're putting the D right up against an E flat. So, and they're rubbing. And that's our flat 2. It's an ugly chord. It sounds complex. That's why I dig it. So that is, that's the principle of this whole thing. It adds this heaviness, but also this harmonic ambiguity that we didn't have before. So this is why it's my favorite section. And on top of it, we have this like machine gun style 16th note, you know, palm muting. It's so heavy. And then it just all fades out. And it just goes back to darkness, basically. It really ends right as we entered. Or the reverse of it even, where we have the things filtering out that filtered in the intro. And that is that's the whole concept of Hocus Potus. And it's a fun track. It's a heavy track. I mean, I dig this. So yeah, that's the breakdown of Hocus Pocus. I need to get back to breaking down my beer because I did a very poor job of that. I did an okay job of this. Well, yeah, leave your comments, your feedback, and I will get to it the next time I do one of these. So have a good morning, have a good night, whatever it is, 1 a.m. here. So I'm done. See ya.